Hello and welcome to Comms Business Live. Today we're talking about the importance of developing a unique service proposition, and I'm delighted to be joined by Scott Goodwin, Senior Vice President for EMEA and Managing Director at NetSapiens. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Hi, good to see you, Charlotte.
Good to see you too. So the topic of today's episode comes from the reality that the unified communications landscape can struggle to articulate points of difference across offerings, leaving the spotlight on price a lot of the time. As such, developing a unique service proposition has never been more important. Service providers need to create distinctive propositions so that they can maintain healthy margins and stand out in the marketplace. Scott, firstly, why is it particularly difficult for channel companies to develop unique unified communications offerings?
I think there's a couple of reasons, really, Charlotte. So one could be the control that they have of their underlying platform. So if they are essentially receiving a managed service as part of their offer themselves, they find themselves in a situation that they can kind of just have it. They can't really manipulate it in any particular way for their own particular means. The underlying service provider is offering a kind of any color you like as long as it's black kind of offer. And that in itself means, because it's a business that's predominantly around economies of scales and efficiencies and all that kind of stuff, it comes pre-packed. The service provider, it has a set amount of features, set amount of functionality, and it comes to them delivered on a price per seat basis that obviously somebody then has to apply whatever margins that they would have on it. So really they're kind of hold beneath the waterline in terms of what they've got in terms of kind of unique service capability that they can wrap around it. I think many ignore, I guess, the other nuances around service propositions, which it isn't so much price and feature or capability, but also support is something that is potentially under the domain and control of the reseller. And there are different, and people will pay for additional capabilities that you are being extended to them. And then you got other things like, insights, analytics and capabilities like these are other things that customers do value as well, and they will be prepared. And most people don't think about that. Is most people just think about, has it got a set of features and functionality, and what is the price?
Definitely. And you've mentioned various aspects there, from kind of a service proposition and kind of bringing that customer understanding into what you're offering. But kind of what would you say are the key things that channel companies should do to create a value proposition that's not relying on price alone?
Yeah, so I mean, think of all of the things in the round, essentially. So price is certainly part of a proposition. There's no question about that. And how you would price it to the end market is absolutely important. I think one of the things that people to know about price as well is if you're buying a service in that comes to you at a fixed cost on a per seat basis, that's quite rigid in the way that you can then ultimately price it onto your end user. So I advise people to look at solutions which can be brought in on a different commercial model, which gives them a lot more downstream options in how they might price it to their particular end users. I would also advise people to look at areas where they can effectively, pick and choose and create their own personas and their own feature sets, their own bundles. That's another part of it, is what a vendor traditionally describes to a service provider as being, this is a feature pack that your customer would like. Well, that might not necessarily be the case. The service provider, I'm sure in many cases, would argue that they know their customers better than the vendor does. And consequently, they should be able to define their own package of capability that their customer would ultimately want. Thirdly, you've got what is the support capability that you put underneath it? What is the service level offer that you would provide? What is the analytical capability that you could provide those in statistics off the back of that? Some customers will want to have a great deal of insight into their usage and their employees' uses or their inbound usage. And again, this can be something that could be orchestrated into part of their overall offer. And I think the last part is it's becoming an increasingly interconnected and integrated world. So not just the telephony capabilities and what that might look like, price, feature, functionality, but how is that going to integrate with other parts of the organizations or the overall offer? So how it might have APIs or integration points into other software that provide better business outcomes for their end users.
And customers was something you mentioned in the middle section there. And when it comes to developing that unique service proposition, really understanding your customers and their requirements is critical to doing that. How can channel companies kind of really ensure they're making sure that that is a focus of the process?
Yeah, I think it's becoming an increasingly important part of the service providers' role. To be honest, is that you've got to. I think the modern service provider, it leverages its customer understanding and the relationship that it has with that organization. Is increasingly you find that big tech organizations interact with its customers through online activities. It tends to have a one-size-fits-all approach to the way that they deploy their products and services. Progressive service providers, they need to be able to step into that void and then provide understanding, develop empathy with the customers, and understand not just their short-term but their medium, long-term goals of what they're seeking to achieve, and be able to craft solutions that fit those needs. So, how do they do that? They maintain good account management. They tease out. They leverage their understanding of their customers, from which they tease out the needs that are required to kind of satisfy and add true value to those things. And then they deliver against those promises, but either through crafting, a solution that's priced appropriately, that has the right integration methods, and it delivers against the goods of the promises that the service provider is seeking to offer.
Absolutely. And something else that can be really critical to standing out in kind of what can be a crowded market is kind of having a strong brand. How can service providers ensure that their own brand is kind of front and center of what they're doing? And why is that important?
Well, I think it goes back to what I was just saying before. It's adding that value. It's if you can demonstrate value to your customers by knowledge and empathy and understanding about what they're going through and how they need to compete, not just now but in the future, and you can help them along that journey. That is exactly the role of a service provider, is to do that. Is not prescribing or predetermining what that particular offer would be. And I think if you can do that by having that engaging conversation, and then really be able to deliver against it, which is the real key thing, is your end customers will value that a great deal, and by extension, they'll value the brand. They'll see this as being a deep value-added relationship that they will have, and then the customers will stay with you longer. They will place more business with you. They will engage with it. These become self-fulfilling prophecies in some ways, because they'll enter you and engage with you in a broader range of subjects as well, because you add value. The organizations that don't add value to you tend to get pushed to one side or marginalized because they're not helping the organization. So if you can do that, and you'll be more opportunities will be forthcoming to you.
Definitely. And unified communications propositions can emphasize functionality over support services. What's your view on kind of that balance between functionality and support?
Yeah, yes, they do. It is the answer to that. it could be a combination of things. Could be that the fact that the support tools that service providers have access to are rather limited. So, for instance, from our own perspective with NetSapiens, is our platform comes with embedded VoIP monitoring capabilities. So our service providers get to see what's going across their platform into an incredibly granular level. So if one of their customers rings them and they've got core problems, they can identify where that problem lies immediately, whether it's in the LAN, whether it's in the WAN, whether it's in the PSTN termination provider. They can get to the root cause of that issue very quickly. And similarly, which I'm probably more appropriate, is when there's core quality issues, packet loss, jitter, and all that kind of stuff, is that they can get to see that as well, into a very, very granular level, and they can provide instantaneous, statistics and reports that they can share with their customers, that gleans confidence that the service provider is on top of the problem immediately, and it's going to be resolved. If the problem resides with a third party in the supply chain, this also gives them the ability to be able to prove to that person in the supply chain that the problem lies in their particular area, all of which resolves in fault resolutions and happier customers and all of that kind of stuff. Now, if they don't have access to that and they only have access to back off a ticket, then there's little value that they can drive from it. So no wonder that it becomes, kind of much more about, I've got this feature or that capability in there. And I think there's a lot of that goes on in the market, is that they just simply don't have the tool sets within their offer to be able to drive value from it, which I think is increasingly a shame, because if you are a service provider and the only things you have to compete on are price and functionality, you'll be compromised and commoditized very quickly in the process. So, you have to be able to gain access to the things that provide value, because if you do have that, what I described before as a capability, is there are many customers that truly value that, and they'll pay a premium for it. Or even if they don't pay a premium for it, they'll be far more assured that their interests are better looked after by the service provider they've got, because of the information that they have, and they stay with you longer, and longer customer lifetime value as a consequence.
So we've covered quite a lot of ground today. Just to kind of summarize at the end, what would you say to listeners about kind of the key thing that they should bear in mind when developing a unique service proposition? Yeah, you need more tools in your bag than feature and price alone. Is that particularly if you are in a situation where you're charging as the rest of the market are charging. If you can't differentiate your offer in the market, you'll end up being commoditized. It's just the way of the game. So then you have to make everything, incredibly efficient. Pile it high, sell it cheap is the only downstream option that you have available for you. I think the real the answer to this is have more than those two levers to be able to pull. And even the first one, which is price, find yourself a situation where you can be far more creative in the pricing models that you can ultimately take to your end users. Have greater control over your platform in price and the ability to create unique service packs. The combination of those two, is a 1 + 1 = 5 in terms of the value that it'll bring to your end users, and also the margin that you'll ultimately make as a service provider. Don't ignore the service and the support elements of a service proposition either, because for many they are as equally interesting as they are as the features or functionality that they may access. And I think finally, just remember that this is an interconnected world. Don't just think about this as a voice service, but how this communication platform will interact with other parts of the business processes of the customers that you're ultimately managing to serve.
And it's those combination of things which ultimately will make you a highly relevant, highly valued service provider, making good, strong margins and growing well.
Definitely. Lots of food for thought there for channel companies to think about with their own propositions. So that brings us to the end of today's show. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us. As we've heard, combining function, support and price and lots of other elements, those different levers that you just mentioned there, will really help service providers' offerings to stand out in a competitive landscape. If anyone watching wants to find out more about NetSapiens and how it works with its partners, there are some links in the video description to point you in the right direction. But for now, thanks, Scott, for joining us, and goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, Charlotte. Always a pleasure.
You too. Thank you.